I went into the hospital with 2 kidneys, and I came out with 1. Nobody told me. Nobody asked me. I had to find out on my own, lying in a recovery room that smelled like disinfectant and lies, while nurses avoided my eyes and doctors pretended I was too drugged to know what questions to ask. But I knew. Deep in my body, in a place that felt hollow and wrong, I knew something had been taken from me. And by the time I could prove it, the people responsible had already rewritten the story. It was supposed to be a simple hernia repair. That's what Dr. Myers called it when he sat across from me in his office 3 weeks before the surgery, his hands folded on the desk like he was about to deliver good news. Routine, he said. We do dozens of these every month. You'll be in and out. Maybe 1 night in the hospital, 2 at most if there are any minor complications, which there won't be. You're young, you're healthy, and this is one of the most straightforward procedures we perform. He smiled at me like I was worrying over nothing, like my nervousness was almost cute. I remember thinking how reassuring he seemed. How trustworthy. If you're new here and you love true medical horror stories, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to tell you is just the beginning of the nightmare I lived through. I was 26 years old at the time, working as an assistant manager at a retail store, living alone in a small apartment, trying to save money for a car that didn't break down every other month. The hernia had been bothering me for almost a year. It started as a small bulge near my groin, uncomfortable but not unbearable. I ignored it for as long as I could because I didn't have great insurance and I was terrified of medical bills. But eventually the pain got worse. I couldn't lift boxes at work anymore. I couldn't sleep on my side. My doctor referred me to a surgeon, and that's how I ended up at St. Almach Medical Center, sitting in Dr. Myers' office, listening to him explain how simple everything would be. The hospital was about 40 minutes from my apartment, out past the edge of the city where the buildings got older and the neighborhoods got quieter. It wasn't the most modern facility I'd ever seen, but it had decent reviews online and it was covered by my insurance. That was enough for me. I didn't think to dig deeper. I didn't think to check if there had been any complaints filed against the surgical department or any malpractice suits that had been quietly settled out of court. I trusted the system. I trusted the white coats and the diplomas on the walls and the sterile smell of the hallways. That was my first mistake. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early November. I remember the weather was cold and gray, the kind of day where the sky looks like a dirty sheet stretched over the world. My friend Marcus drove me to the hospital because I wasn't allowed to drive myself home afterward. He waited with me in the pre-op area, making jokes to keep me calm, telling me I'd be fine, that I'd probably wake up craving a cheeseburger and complaining about the hospital gown. I laughed, but my hands were shaking. I've never liked hospitals. Something about them has always made me feel like prey. A nurse came to take my vitals around 7 in the morning. Her name tag said, Denise, and she had the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd been working long shifts for too many years. She asked me the standard questions, allergies, medications, when I'd last eaten or had anything to drink. I answered everything honestly. She typed my responses into a tablet, asked me to sign a few forms, and told me the anesthesiologist would be in to see me shortly. Everything felt normal. Routine. Just like Dr. Myers had promised. The anesthesiologist was a tall man with graying hair and a quiet voice. He introduced himself as Dr. Pallister. He explained that I would be under general anesthesia, that I wouldn't feel anything during the procedure, and that I might feel groggy and nauseous when I woke up. He asked if I had any questions. I asked him how long the surgery would take. About an hour, he said. Maybe a little longer depending on what we find, but nothing to worry about. He patted my arm in a way that was probably meant to be comforting but felt strangely clinical, like he was checking the texture of my skin rather than reassuring me. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the hum of machines and the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor. Marcus had to leave for work, so he hugged me and told me to text him when I woke up. I watched him walk out through the double doors, and I felt a strange tightness in my chest, like I was watching something important slip away. I told myself I was being dramatic. It was just a hernia repair. People had them done every day. There was no reason to feel like I was saying goodbye. They came to wheel me into the operating room around 8:30. The ceiling tiles passed overhead in a blur of fluorescent light. I remember counting them, trying to keep my mind occupied, trying not to think about the fact that I was about to be unconscious while strangers cut into my body. The ore was cold, much colder than I expected, and it smelled like metal and something faintly chemical. There were people moving around me, adjusting equipment, speaking in low voices. Someone placed a mask over my face and told me to count backward from 10. I got to 7. And then there was nothing. Waking up from anesthesia is not like waking up from sleep. There's no gentle transition, no slow drift back to consciousness. It's more like being dragged up from the bottom of a dark ocean, your lungs burning, your thoughts scattered and wrong. I remember opening my eyes and seeing only shapes at first, blurred and colorless. I remember trying to speak and hearing only a dry croak come out of my throat. I remember pain, not the sharp, localized pain I expected from the hernia incision, but something deeper, something that seemed to radiate from my lower back and wrap around my side like a hot wire. A nurse appeared beside me. Not Denise, someone else. A younger woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She told me the surgery was over, that everything had gone well, that I should rest. I tried to ask her why my back hurt so much, but she was already walking away, already attending to something else, and I was too weak to call after her. I drifted in and out of consciousness for what felt like hours, caught in that terrible limbo between sleep and waking where nothing feels real and time has no meaning. When I finally woke up enough to think clearly, I was in a different room. A recovery room with pale green walls and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. The sun was lower in the sky than it should have been. According to the clock on the wall, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. The surgery was supposed to take an hour. I had been unconscious for nearly 8. The first thing I did was reach for the call button. My hand felt heavy and clumsy, like it belonged to someone else, but I managed to press the button and hold it down until a nurse appeared in the doorway. It was the same blonde woman from before, the one who had brushed off my question about the pain. Her name tag said, Kira. She looked at me with an expression that was hard to read, not concern, exactly, but something watchful. Guarded. How are you feeling? She asked, but her voice was flat, like she was reading from a script. My back hurts, I said. My throat was raw from the intubation tube, and every word felt like sandpaper. Why does my back hurt? The hernia was in my groin. Kira hesitated. It was only for a second, maybe less, but I noticed it. That tiny pause before she answered, like she was choosing her words very carefully. Sometimes the positioning during surgery can cause muscle strain, she said. It's not unusual to feel sore in unexpected places. I'll make a note for the doctor. She adjusted my fore and checked the monitors beside my bed without meeting my eyes. I watched her hands move, precise and practiced, and I felt a cold thread of unease curl through my stomach. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, couldn't point to any single thing that was obviously out of place, but my instincts were screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. When can I see Dr. Myers? I asked. He's in another surgery right now, Kira said. He'll check on you later this evening or first thing tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? I thought I was only staying one night. Another pause. Another careful selection of words. The doctor wants to keep you for observation a bit longer. Just to make sure everything is healing properly. It's standard procedure for cases like yours. Cases like mine. What did that mean? What kind of case was I? Kira left before I could ask any more questions. I lay there in the silence, listening to the beep of the heart monitor and the distant murmur of voices in the hallway, and I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. The anesthesia was probably still affecting my judgment. The pain in my back was probably just muscle strain, like she said. There was probably a perfectly reasonable explanation for why I had been unconscious for 8 hours instead of 1. I just needed to rest, to let my body recover, and everything would make sense in the morning. But my body wouldn't let me rest. Every time I started to drift off, the pain in my side would flare up and drag me back to consciousness. It wasn't the incision site, I checked, carefully peeling back the hospital gown to look at the bandage on my lower abdomen. That area was sore but manageable, exactly what I expected from a hernia repair. The real pain was coming from somewhere else. somewhere behind me, near my kidney. I tried to reach around and feel my back, but the movement sent a spike of agony through my torso that made me gasp and fall back against the pillows. There was definitely something there. A bandage, thick and wide, covering a part of my body that had no business being bandaged after a hernia repair. My heart started beating faster. I could see the change on the monitor beside me, the numbers climbing, the steady beep becoming more urgent. I pressed the call button again. No one came. I pressed it again, holding it down, feeling the panic rise in my chest like floodwater. Still no one. I waited what felt like an eternity before Kira finally reappeared. She looked annoyed this time, her lips pressed into a thin line. Is something wrong? There's a bandage on my back, I said. Why is there a bandage on my back? Kira's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker of something that might have been fear. The surgical team can explain that better than I can, she said. I'll make sure the doctor knows you have questions. I have questions now. I want answers now. I understand you're frustrated, she said, and her voice had taken on that soothing, condescending tone that medical professionals use when they want you to calm down and stop asking inconvenient questions. But you've just had surgery, and you need to rest. The doctor will explain everything when he sees you. What did they do to me? My voice was rising, cracking. I could hear the hysteria creeping in, but I couldn't stop it. What did they do that I didn't agree to? Kira took a step back, her hand moving toward her pocket, toward a pager or a phone, I couldn't tell. I'm going to get someone who can help you, she said. Please try to stay calm. She was gone before I could respond, and I was alone again with the beeping machines and the pain that shouldn't exist and the terrible, growing certainty that something had been done to me in that operating room. Something I hadn't consented to. Something they didn't want me to know about. I don't know how long I lay there before the next person came. It might have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. Time had become slippery, unreliable. But eventually the door opened and a man walked in wearing scrubs and a white coat. He wasn't Dr. Myers. He was younger, with dark hair and a face that was carefully arranged into an expression of professional concern. I'm Dr. Trent, he said, pulling a chair up beside my bed. I'm one of the surgeons on staff here. I understand you have some concerns about your procedure. I want to see Dr. Myers. Dr. Myers is unavailable at the moment, but I assisted with your surgery, so I can answer any questions you might have. I stared at him, trying to read his face, trying to find some crack in that polished facade. Why do I have a bandage on my back? I came in for a hernia repair. That's in the front. Why is there an incision on my back? Dr. Trent nodded slowly, like this was a perfectly reasonable question with a perfectly reasonable answer. During the procedure, we discovered some unexpected scar tissue that was affecting the surgical field. We had to make a small secondary incision to ensure we had adequate access. It's not common, but it's not unheard of either. The important thing is that the hernia has been successfully repaired. A secondary incision, I repeated, on my back. For scar tissue. That's correct. And nobody thought to mention this to me before now? Post-operative communication can sometimes be delayed when multiple patients require attention. I apologize for any confusion or distress this has caused you. He was lying. I couldn't prove it, couldn't point to any specific tell that gave him away, but I knew it in my bones. The way he answered too smoothly, too quickly, like he had rehearsed this explanation beforehand. The way he avoided my eyes when he talked about the secondary incision. The way his hand stayed perfectly still in his lap, too controlled, too deliberate. I want to see my chart, I said. Dr. Trent's smile didn't waver, but something in his posture stiffened. Your chart. My medical record. The surgical notes. Whatever documentation exists about what was done to me today. Of course, you have every right to access your medical records. I'll have someone from medical records bring you a copy once it's been processed. These things take time, you understand. There's a lot of paperwork involved in any surgical procedure. How much time? Usually 24 to 48 hours. 24 to 48 hours. Plenty of time for them to edit whatever they needed to edit. Plenty of time to make the paperwork match the story they were telling me. I want it now, I said. Or I want to speak to someone in hospital administration. Dr. Trent stood up, and I saw the mask slip for just a moment. Behind the professional concern, there was something harder. Something cold. I understand you're upset, he said. Surgery can be disorienting, especially with general anesthesia. It's not uncommon for patients to feel confused or anxious afterward. I'm going to have someone bring you something to help you relax. I don't want to relax. I want answers. And you'll get them, he said. But right now, the best thing you can do for your recovery is rest. He left before I could argue further, and a few minutes later Kira returned with a syringe. She said it was for the pain, but I saw the way her hands trembled slightly as she injected it into my foreline, and I knew it was more than that. They were sedating me. They were shutting me up. I tried to fight it, tried to stay awake, but the drug was stronger than my will. The room began to blur and soften, the edges dissolving into gray fog. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the sound of footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving fast, and a voice I didn't recognize saying, "We need to move the timeline up. He's asking too many questions." I dreamed about the operating room. In the dream, I was awake but paralyzed, staring up at the surgical lights while masked figures moved around me. I could feel everything: the cold metal of the table, the pressure of hands on my body, the terrible sensation of being opened up like a package. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my limbs wouldn't obey. All I could do was lie there and watch as they reached inside me and took something out. Something dark and wet and vital. They held it up to the light, and I could see it pulsing, still alive, still mine. And then one of the masked figures looked down at me, and even though I couldn't see their face, I knew they were smiling. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The room was dark. Night had fallen while I was under, and the only light came from the machines beside my bed and a thin strip of fluorescence under the door. I was alone. No nurses, no doctors, no one to ask questions or give me answers. Just the beeping monitors and the darkness and the pain that still radiated from that wrongful place on my back. I lay there for a long time, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to separate the nightmare from the reality. But the more I thought about it, the less certain I became. Had they really found scar tissue during my surgery? Was there really a reasonable explanation for the incision on my back? Or had something else happened in that operating room, something the doctors didn't want me to know about? I needed information. I needed proof. And the only way I was going to get either of those things was to find it myself. Moving was agony. Every shift of my body sent fresh waves of pain through my torso, and I had to bite down on the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. But I managed to swing my legs over the side of the bed and push myself upright. My head swam. My vision blurred. For a moment I thought I was going to pass out, and I gripped the bed rail until my knuckles turned white, willing myself to stay conscious. The four-stand had wheels. I could use it for support like a makeshift walker. I disconnected the pulse oximeter from my finger. The monitor beeped in protest, but no one came running, and slowly, painfully, made my way to the door. The hallway was dim and empty. Most of the overhead lights had been turned off for the night, leaving only the emergency exit signs and the soft glow from the nurse's station at the far end of the corridor. I could see someone sitting there, head bent over paperwork, but they hadn't noticed me yet. I pressed myself against the wall and tried to think. My medical records would be in the computer system. Every hospital had electronic records these days. If I could get to a terminal, if I could access my chart, I might be able to see what they had actually done to me. But I didn't have a password. I didn't even know how to navigate the hospital's software. And even if I found my records, what were the chances they hadn't already been altered? There had to be another way. Physical evidence. Something they couldn't change with a few keystrokes. I remembered passing a supply closet on the way to my room, back when they were wheeling me up from the recovery area. It was just around the corner from where I stood now, maybe 30 feet away. If I could get there without being seen, I might be able to find something useful. Bandages I could use to check my wound without the nurses knowing. Paperwork they had discarded. Anything. I moved as quietly as I could, which wasn't very quiet at all. The four-stand rattled with every step, and my hospital gown whispered against my legs. But the nurse at the station remained focused on her paperwork, and I made it to the supply closet without being spotted. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside and closed it behind me, plunging myself into darkness. I fumbled along the wall until I found a light switch and flipped it on, blinking against the sudden brightness. The closet was smaller than I expected, lined with shelves that held the usual hospital supplies: gauze, tape, syringes, bottles of various solutions. Nothing useful. Nothing that would tell me what had happened in that operating room. I was about to give up and sneak back to my room when I noticed a plastic bin on the bottom shelf, half hidden behind a case of saline bags. It was labeled surgical waste, pending disposal. My hands were shaking as I pulled the bin out and lifted the lid. Inside was a jumble of used medical supplies, bloody gauze, surgical drapes, packaging from various instruments. And underneath all of that, crumpled and stained but still legible, was a piece of paper. It was a surgical consent form. My surgical consent form, with my name and date of birth printed at the top and my signature at the bottom. But something was wrong. There were 2 procedures listed, not one. The first was inguinal hernia repair, which was what I had agreed to. The second was something else entirely, laparoscopic nephrectomy, left. I didn't know what nephrectomy meant, but something about the word filled me with cold dread. I stared at the form, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I had only signed for one procedure. I was certain of it. I remembered sitting in the pre-op area, reading through the paperwork, making sure everything was correct before I put my name on the line. There had been only one procedure listed: hernia repair. Nothing else. Someone had added the second procedure after I signed. Or they had switched out the form entirely, replacing the original with this altered version. Either way, they had documentation now that made it look like I had consented to something I had never agreed to. Laparoscopic nephrectomy. I pulled out my phone. Thank God I had insisted on keeping it in my room instead of letting them lock it in a safe, and typed the term into the search bar. The results loaded slowly on the hospital's weak Wi-Fi, but when they finally appeared, the words on the screen made my blood run cold. A nephrectomy is the surgical removal of a kidney. They had taken my kidney. While I was unconscious, while I trusted them to perform a simple hernia repair, they had cut into my back and removed one of my kidneys without my knowledge or consent. I must have made some kind of sound, a gasp, a moan, I don't know, because the next thing I heard was footsteps in the hallway, moving fast, coming closer. I shoved the consent form into the pocket of my hospital gown and turned off the light, pressing myself against the shelves and praying that whoever it was would pass by without checking the closet. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. "Are you sure you saw someone come this way?" A woman's voice. Kira, maybe, or one of the other nurses. The monitor at the station showed movement in this corridor. A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Check the supply closet. The door handle began to turn. I don't know what I would have done if they had found me. Screamed, probably. Fought. Tried to run even though I could barely walk. But before the door could open, another voice called out from somewhere down the hall. "We need help in room 312. Patient is coding." The footsteps retreated, fast and urgent, and I heard the woman shouting orders as she ran. I waited until the sounds faded, then slipped out of the closet and made my way back to my room as quickly as my broken body would allow. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay in bed with the consent form hidden under my pillow, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand why this had happened to me. Why would a hospital steal someone's kidney? The only explanation I could think of was organ trafficking, but that seemed insane. This was a legitimate medical facility in America, not some back alley clinic in a developing country. Things like this didn't happen here. They couldn't happen here. But the evidence was under my pillow. The pain was in my back. And somewhere in this hospital, in a cooler or a transport container, my kidney was waiting to be given to someone else. When morning came, I was ready for them. Dr. Myers finally appeared around 9 in the morning, sweeping into my room with that same confident smile I remembered from his office. He was wearing a fresh white coat and carrying a tablet, and he looked at me like I was just another item on his to-do list, Just another patient to check off before lunch. Good morning, he said. How are we feeling today? I know what you did. The smile didn't waver, but I saw his eyes change. A flash of something, surprise, maybe, or calculation, before the mask slid back into place. I'm not sure what you mean. I reached under my pillow and pulled out the consent form. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. Laparoscopic nephrectomy. You took my kidney. I never consented to that procedure. I never even knew it was happening until I found this in your surgical waste bin. Dr. Myers looked at the paper in my hand, and for a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched out between us, thick and heavy, filled with all the things he wasn't saying. Then he sighed and set his tablet down on the bedside table. I was hoping we could avoid this conversation, he said. But since you've forced the issue, let me explain. He pulled up a chair and sat down, folding his hands in his lap just like he had in his office 3 weeks ago. But there was nothing reassuring about him now. Now he looked like what he was, a predator who had been caught mid-hunt. During your hernia repair, we discovered a mass on your left kidney, he said. The imaging we had done before the surgery didn't show it. These things can be missed, especially if they're small or positioned in a way that makes them difficult to see. We had to make a judgment call. The mass looked suspicious, potentially cancerous. If we had closed you up and scheduled a second surgery, there was a risk that the cancer, if that's what it was, could have spread. We decided that the safest course of action was to remove the kidney while we already had you on the table. I stared at him. You're lying. I understand this is difficult to hear. No, you're lying. I read the consent form. The nephrectomy was listed as a separate procedure, not an emergency addition. And the timestamp on the form is from before my surgery even started. You planned this. You planned to take my kidney from the beginning. Something shifted in Dr. Myers' expression. The pretense of concern fell away, and underneath it was something cold and hard and utterly indifferent to my suffering. You should be careful, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Making accusations like that. Hospitals have lawyers. Very good lawyers. And you're a retail worker with no medical background and no witnesses to support your claims. The consent form has your signature on it. The surgical notes document a mass that was found during the procedure. Your medical records show that you were informed of the nephrectomy before you were discharged from the recovery room, even if you don't remember that conversation, which wouldn't be unusual given the effects of anesthesia. That's not true. None of that is true. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what can be proven. He stood up, smoothing the front of his white coat. My advice to you is to focus on your recovery. You've been through a lot. Your body needs time to heal, and stress will only slow that process down. I'll have the discharge paperwork prepared for this afternoon. Do you have someone who can pick you up? I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I sat there in that hospital bed, watching the man who had stolen a piece of my body walk toward the door like nothing had happened, like we had just been discussing the weather. Why? The word came out cracked and broken. Why did you do this to me? Dr. Myers paused in the doorway. He didn't turn around. Because someone needed it more than you did, he said. And because we could. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the ruins of my life. The next few hours were a blur of panic and desperation. I tried calling the police, but when I explained what had happened, the officer on the line sounded skeptical. So you had surgery, and now you think the doctors took extra organs? Sir, have you been taking any medications that might be affecting your perception? I tried calling a lawyer, but the first 3 I reached told me they couldn't take the case without more evidence. I tried calling Marcus, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I was trapped in that hospital room, surrounded by people who had violated my body and my trust, and there was nothing I could do about it. The system that was supposed to protect me was the same system that had allowed this to happen. The doctors, the nurses, the administrators, they were all part of it, all complicit, all protected by layers of bureaucracy and legal jargon and the simple fact that no one wanted to believe that something this horrific could happen in a place dedicated to healing. Around noon, a different nurse came in to check my vitals. She was older than Kira, with gray streaks in her dark hair and deep lines around her eyes. Her name tag said, Margaret. She moved efficiently, professionally, but when she reached for my arm to check the 4-line, I saw her hands hesitate. You know, don't you? I whispered. You know what they did to me. Margaret didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the 4, her jaw tight. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. Please help me. I have no one else. For a long moment, she was silent. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, she said, There's a camera blind spot in the stairwell by the east exit. 4th floor, door at the end of the hall. If someone wanted to leave without being seen, that's how they do it. She pulled back, her face expressionless, and made a note on her tablet. Your discharge papers will be ready at 3. Get some rest. She left before I could thank her. I didn't wait for the discharge papers. As soon as Margaret was gone, I pulled out my 4, a sharp sting of pain, a small trickle of blood, and got out of bed. The consent form was still in my pocket. My phone was charged. I had no shoes, no clothes, nothing but a hospital gown and a stolen piece of evidence, but I couldn't stay here any longer. If I waited until 3, there was no telling what might happen. They might decide I was too much of a risk. They might sedate me again or worse. The hallway was busy with the lunchtime rush. Nurses hurrying between rooms, orderlies pushing carts, visitors looking lost and anxious. No one paid attention to me as I shuffled toward the east end of the floor, moving as fast as my wounded body would allow. The pain was constant now, a deep throb that pulsed with every heartbeat, but I pushed through it. I had to get out. I had to find someone who would believe me. The stairwell door was exactly where Margaret said it would be. I pushed it open and slipped inside, letting it close behind me with a soft click. The stairs stretched down into shadow, for flights between me and freedom. I gripped the railing and started to descend. I made it to the 2nd floor before I heard the door above me open. He's in the east stairwell. A man's voice, calm and professional. I'm in pursuit. I ran. Or tried to run. It was more of a desperate, stumbling lurch, each step sending fresh agony through my torso. The footsteps behind me were getting closer. I could hear heavy breathing, the squeak of shoes on concrete. I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't. The door to the 1st floor burst open as I reached it, and I nearly collided with a woman in scrubs. She grabbed my arm to steady me, and I looked up into her face and saw recognition there. Not the cold recognition of a predator, but something else. Something like fear. You're the one from this morning, she said. The one asking about the nephrectomy. Please, I gasped. Please help me. They're coming. She looked past me, up the stairwell, and I saw her make a decision. This way. Quickly. She pulled me through the door and into a service corridor, then through another door into what looked like a maintenance room. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the air smelled like machine oil and dampness. She pushed me behind a row of metal shelves and held a finger to her lips. Footsteps passed by outside. A voice called out, Did you see anyone come through here? Patient in a gown, male, the 20s. No, sorry, the woman called back. I've been in the supply room for the last 10 minutes. The pause. Then the footsteps moved on, fading into the distance. The woman turned to look at me, and in the dim light of the maintenance room, I could see the conflict on her face. I'm not supposed to be helping you, she said. If they find out, I'll lose my job. Maybe worse. Why are you helping me? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Because you're not the first one. My blood turned to ice. What? You're not the first patient they've done this to. There have been others. At least 6 that I know of over the past 2 years. Young, healthy, no family nearby, no one who would ask too many questions. They all came in for minor procedures. They all left with something missing. But why would they do this? Money. There's a black market for organs, kidneys especially. A healthy kidney can sell for $200,000 or more to the right buyer. And the people at the top of this hospital have very expensive tastes. I felt like I was going to be sick. Dr. Myers? He's part of it. So is Dr. Pallister, the anesthesiologist. A few of the nurses. The hospital administrator. They've built a whole system for identifying targets, harvesting organs, and covering their tracks. The paperwork is always perfect. The patients are always confused and traumatized and easy to discredit. By the time anyone thinks to investigate, the evidence is gone and the organ is halfway across the country. There has to be something we can do. Someone we can tell. I've been trying for months. But every time I think I have enough evidence, it disappears. Files get deleted. Witnesses recant. One of the nurses who was going to talk to a reporter had a car accident the week before their meeting. They said it was brake failure. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is the name and number of a journalist who's been investigating medical malpractice cases in the region. She's the only one I trust. Call her when you get out of here. Tell her everything. And whatever you do, don't go home. They know where you live. They'll be watching. I took the paper with numb fingers. What about you? I'll be fine. I've survived this long by being careful. She moved toward the door, then paused. The loading dock is at the end of this corridor, through the double doors on the left. There should be a delivery truck leaving in about 15 minutes. If you can get on it, they can drop you somewhere safe. I don't even know your name. She smiled, but it was a sad smile, the smile of someone who had seen too much. It's better if you don't. Good luck. She was gone before I could say another word. I found the loading dock. I found the truck. And as it pulled away from St. Almach Medical Center, carrying me hidden among boxes of medical supplies, I pressed my hand against the bandage on my back and felt the hollow place where my kidney used to be. Behind me, the hospital grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared from view. The journalist's name was Elena Vasquez, and she didn't believe me at first. I could hear the skepticism in her voice when I called her from a payphone outside a gas station 30 miles from the hospital, my hospital gown hidden under a stolen maintenance worker's jacket. But I kept talking. I told her about the surgery, about the consent form, about Dr. Meyer's admission, about the woman in the maintenance room and the other patients who had been harvested like crops. And slowly, gradually, her skepticism turned to something else. Interest. Then concern. Then something that sounded almost like anger. Can you send me a photo of the consent form? She asked. I did. The phone I had wasn't great, but the image was clear enough. Clear enough to see my signature at the bottom and the 2 procedures listed above it. Clear enough to see the timestamp that proved the nephrectomy had been planned before my surgery began. This is real, Elena said. There was a new urgency in her voice now. This is actually real. Do you have any other evidence? Medical records, witness names, anything. I told her everything I knew. It wasn't much. A few names, a few fragments of conversation, the memory of a woman whose face I could barely recall, but Elena wrote it all down. She told me to find somewhere safe to stay, somewhere the hospital couldn't find me. She told me she would start making calls. I spent the next 3 weeks living in motels, paying cash, never staying in the same place more than 2 nights. I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't call my friends. I didn't contact my family. I was a ghost, drifting through the margins of the world, waiting for something to change. Elena called me every few days with updates. She had found records of the other patients, or rather, the absence of records, gaps in the hospital's database that suggested files had been deleted. She had tracked down one of the former victims, a woman named Sarah who had gone in for gallbladder surgery and woken up missing her left kidney. Sarah had tried to sue, but the hospital's lawyers had buried her in motions and depositions until she ran out of money and gave up. She agreed to talk to Elena on the condition that her name never appeared in print. The story grew. More victims came forward. More inconsistencies emerged. Elena found a paper trail linking Dr. Myers to a series of shell companies that received large payments from overseas accounts. She found emails between hospital administrators discussing optimal donor profiles and acquisition timelines. She found a refrigerated storage unit in a warehouse outside the city that had been rented under a false name, a unit that had contained, according to shipping records, medical-grade coolers of the type used to transport organs. The police got involved. Then the FBI. Then a special prosecutor's office that handled medical crimes. 6 months after I woke up in that recovery room, Dr. Myers was arrested. So was Dr. Pallister, and 3 nurses, and the hospital administrator, and a transplant coordinator at a clinic 2 states away who had been matching stolen organs with wealthy recipients. The story made national news. Hospital of Horrors, they called it. Kidney theft ring exposed. For a few weeks, my face was everywhere, interviews and press conferences and 1,000 strangers sending me messages of support and outrage. But here's the thing about justice. It never gives you back what was taken. The people who stole my kidney went to prison. Dr. Myers got 25 years. The others got sentences ranging from 10 years to life, depending on their level of involvement. The hospital was shut down, then sold, then demolished. A memorial was built on the site, a small garden with a plaque listing the names of the victims. My name is on that plaque. Sarah's name is on it too, and the names of 11 other people whose bodies were violated in the name of profit. But I still wake up every morning with a hollow feeling in my side. I still have to take medications to protect my remaining kidney. I still have nightmares about the operating room, about masked figures reaching into my body and pulling out pieces of me. I still flinch when I smell disinfectant or hear the beep of a heart monitor. The trauma doesn't go away just because the people who caused it are behind bars. It lives in your body, in your bones, in the part of your brain that never stops scanning for threats. The settlement money helped. The hospital's insurance company paid out millions to the victims, and my share was enough to quit my job, move to a new city, and start over. I have a different name now, a different life. Most days, I can almost pretend that the person who walked into St. Almach Medical Center for a routine hernia repair was someone else entirely. A stranger whose story I read about in the news. But then I catch sight of the scar on my back in the bathroom mirror, and I remember. The woman from the maintenance room, I never learned her real name, was right about one thing. I wasn't the first, and I wasn't the last. Even after the arrests, even after the trials, even after all the news coverage and the policy changes and the promises that this could never happen again, there are still hospitals out there with doctors who see their patients as resources to be exploited. There are still waiting lists for organs that stretch on for years, and desperate people with money who will pay anything to skip to the front. There are still gaps in the system, cracks that predators can slip through. I share my story not because I want sympathy. I share it because I want you to know that the person in the white coat doesn't always have your best interests at heart. I want you to know that consent forms can be forged, that medical records can be altered, that the institution you trust to save your life might be the same institution that destroys it. I want you to know that you have the right to ask questions, to demand answers, to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. If this story kept you up at night, if it made you think twice about your next doctor's appointment, then subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications. Because the medical system is full of stories like mine, stories of trust betrayed, of bodies violated, of lives changed forever by people who swore an oath to do no harm. And the only way to protect yourself is to know what you're up against. The last thing I want to tell you is this: I survived. Against all odds, against all the forces that were working to keep me silent, I survived. I told my story. I got justice or something close to it. But survival is not the same as victory, and justice is not the same as healing. I will carry the weight of what happened to me for the rest of my life. I will always be the person who went in for routine surgery and came out missing something I never agreed to lose. And every time I look in the mirror, I wonder, if it could happen to me, what's to stop it from happening to you?